Hi everyone, thanks for listening to my presentation today. I'm going to be discussing Socratic questioning, the Socratic method, which is a really great way of encouraging your students to think critically. Student, in this case, I may be referring to a patient that you're educating or many other things. So first, let's talk about who was Socrates, and I assume you figured by the name that this method was based off of Socrates. And what we know about Socrates is that he was a Greek philosopher, lived probably around 470 to 399 BC. He had lots of students, lots of followers. Among the most famous of those was Plato. And Plato was known to record through writing the things that Socrates presented to him, because Socrates himself has actually no written text. He did not leave us with anything written, so we take everything that we know about him is from accounts from other people, especially Plato. And Plato writes a lot about how Socrates contributes to ethics and ironies and discussions of philosophy. In fact, Socrates is often known as the founding figure of Western philosophy. And what I mean by Western philosophy is, philosophy is those intellectual endeavors, and we're including problems now of philosophy as it's understood in the modern world. That's what makes it our Western philosophy. So all these things that he was talking about back in 400 BC are things that we can still apply to current philosophy across the world. He is known for asking questions. Many people who, you know, passed down the stories of Socrates did say, he would go up to anyone and start a conversation, and he was looking for anyone who would listen, and he had questions. And he aimed to study the good life and justice and beauty and virtue, and all of this combined led to critical thinking. He really liked to challenge people to critically think for themselves, including the youth. And what ended up happening was he was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth by stimulating this need to think independently. And he went to jail. And although his friends did offer to try to break him out, he stayed and lived out his sentence and ended up being executed by drinking poison hemlock. So, as I already alluded to, the Socratic method is heavily based in critical thinking. That is the whole main component of the Socratic method. So, there are certain things that every sort of learning opportunity, all the relationships within these educator and learner opportunities that we have in group settings, in education settings, in healthcare settings, they all have 7 of the same shared things. And let's go over them quickly. The first thing is, in any sort of Socratic method of teaching, any setting like that, you're going to have shared goals and objectives, meaning you have to have an idea of what is the focus of this subject. What are we talking about today? What's our focus? So those are our shared goals, our shared objectives. We're going to also have shared questions and problems, meaning what is the solution we're working to? Together as a group, we are working towards solving a problem. So what is that? Where's our end game here? We also have shared info and data, and I think that pretty much speaks for itself. The teacher has presented information to you. You had information to read, maybe assignments, brochures given to you by your doctor, but everyone is privy to that same info and data in this type of situation. Everyone has shared modes of judging information. We all have the ability to form our own opinions, to speak those opinions, and to judge, not in a bad way, but judge other people's opinions on how they come across also. So that's another thing we all share in the Socratic method. There's a lot of shared concepts and ideas, and this is what helps to organize the data of the group as you move forward in this sort of teaching experience. also many shared assumptions. And these assumptions that the group has as a whole and also as individuals, it gives us a basis, a jumping point. It's where we can begin in the questioning, in the discussion. So that's what our assumptions are for. And then there's that shared point of view, which enables the group as a whole to pursue a common goal. What is the end game of this discussion? And all these things together lead right back to critical thinking. Critical thinking can't enunciate that enough. It is a very integral part of the Socratic method. This method is focused on giving the students questions and not answers, and that's what differs it from the lecture method. In the Socratic questioning method, we're providing the students with questions and they are talking through and gaining that answer themselves, as opposed to a teacher writing an outline on a board with all the answers to the questions. It's very commonly associated with Bloom's taxonomy, and I recommend if you have a shot, if you got a chance, go look it out, read about it a little bit. But it just is telling us sort of how learning goes, from memorization, applying it, analyzing the information you're given. And those ones in the middle there, the applying, the analyzing, those especially are very much related to critical thinking. And so it's a really neat way to look and see how this Socratic method very much overlaps with this Bloom's taxonomy. So a neat quote that I found is that the role of the teacher is to encourage the learner to explore a given topic by asking thought-inducing questions and creating contradictions by posing counterexamples. So if we quickly break that down, key points I want to point out: the teacher is encouraging the learner, okay? So we're encouraging them to open up, encouraging them to speak their mind, and not just to recite data they know or anything like that, but to explore the topic. We want them to explore the topic, and we're going to do that by giving them thought-producing questions, making them critical think, and then giving them contradictions and counterexamples to make them rethink what they've already thought through. So that's a good way of breaking this down also. If you find yourself as a questioner in the Socratic method, you have to remember that your job here is to ask questions in a way that forces the class into an organized intellectual discussion. But you're still facilitating that discussion, but it's a way for them to interact among each other. So the ways you need to do that: you got to stay focused and on task. If you get off task, if you start spiderwebbing and leading from this topic, reminds me of this, reminds me of that, reminds me of that, it's not going to be an effective way. You really have to kind of know what path you want to go down before you even start this. That's where that preparation comes in, and keep everyone focused. Also, you're going to want to ask probing questions to prolong that discussion. And I don't mean personal questions that make people uncomfortable. I just mean probing to deeper, ask them deeper questions to elaborate more on what they were saying, so we're not just scratching the surface. You're going to want to involve as many students as possible, because that's how we get a lot of opinions and a lot of good discussion back and forth. And I think I said earlier, it does often work in a smaller classroom setting better. And then you got to remember to summarize what's already been resolved. So if we have, beat this horse until it was totally dead, then we're going to summarize what we learned and we're going to move on to another topic. We're not going to just keep repeating ourselves over and over again. So that's how the teacher has to keep things rolling. So if we want to break that down and simplify it, you're going to ask challenging, open-ended questions. You're going to ask why. You're going to build upon that first question by going deeper. And you're going to come up with new ideas for conversations based on those questions. You're going to keep continually asking questions to get your ideas integrated into the conversation already going as the teacher. And then you're going to repeat those steps over and over and over again as long as it takes to have a good, healthy, direct conversation with your class, your group, your patient, whoever the student in this opportunity happens to be. So let's talk about some examples of good Socratic questions. You might start a conversation by saying, what makes us human? I mean, that's a pretty open-ended question, and you should get some good conversation jumping right off the bat. Once you get an answer or two, then follow that up with, can you explain what you mean by What you're doing here is you're asking for clarification. You want them to clarify why they answered how they did. Another way you could ask this is, could you put that another way? It's just getting them to think about it again in a different manner. Follow that up with, why is this question important? This is making them think about the question itself, not the answer, not what their answer was, but why are we talking about this at all? And it's a very philosophical question. You might also say it by, is this an easy question for you or a difficult question? You get some really interesting answers when you start questioning the actual question. Also, what could we assume instead? This is an assumption question. You might ask, why would someone make this assumption? And it's just a way of getting the students to realize, the differing of opinions and where they maybe formed their opinion for this topic. What led you to that belief? This is a reasoning question, an evidence question. Where did they come up with the reasoning behind this belief that they've just shared with us? Where did you get that idea is another good question. Not an accusatory question, but it gives you a sense of the origin of the source. Did they read it somewhere? Did they see it on TV? Is it something they've lived through in their real life? It's a good way to get to the bottom of things. Some more. What effect would that have? It leads people to think about the consequences and the implications of this belief system. What might someone who believed blank think? This is a great question to get people to reevaluate their opinion and think of it from someone else's point of view. Let's talk about some places that Socratic learning might be effective. Obviously, in the classroom, a teacher might get through to his students a lot better by engaging them in great conversation than just standing at the lecture podium and lecturing to them. In a support group, this is a great way for the leader to really lead conversation and try to get people to delve deeper into how they're feeling. Psychiatrists and counselors use this all the time to really get to the bottom of why their client is feeling how they are. And of course, most important to us right now is this nurse-patient relationship. You'll find it in discharge instructions, in your interview, your history, all over the nurse-patient relationship. And let's take a look at a few of those. Here's some examples of some Socratic questions you might have to use as the nurse. Can you explain what you mean when you say a well-balanced diet? We know we would be doing a disservice if all we did was check the box that says client has a well-balanced diet, even though their blood work is saying that they're low in protein and low in calcium. We really need to explore what they actually know about a well-balanced diet. What effect would it have if you continued to not test your blood sugars regularly? This would be a great question to lead them to think about consequences and future consequences. Not everyone's always thinking about the future, but this is a way to make someone think about their future. How does my question about your advance directive make you feel? Instead of just going through the cold checklist of, life-sustaining treatment, power of attorney, all of that, you could really build a therapeutic relationship with your client if you ask them how talking about this is making them feel. There are lots of pros and cons to the Socratic method, so let's go through a few here. It keeps the discussion focused. As long as the presenter was prepared for it, you can really keep it on track. It arouses curiosity and interest. A lot of people learn better when they can actively engage in the conversation and hear what their peers have to say. It keeps teaching interesting on both sides. The students are more interested because it's different every day, and the teacher is more interested because it's a completely different way of getting things across to your students than lecturing. It definitely stimulates discussion. It gives constant feedback in that the teacher is constantly revamping new questions, coming up with new questions, making them dig a little deeper. It's constant feedback. And the educator should be periodically summarizing And that constant summary of what they're talking about is a really good learning tool. So we got a lot of good stuff going on. As far as cons, it takes a lot of preparation. This is not something you can just walk into without having prepared for this class as an educator. The educator really needs to take time to learn about the different types of questions, to have some questions in mind, and really needs to know the subject matter really well to lead an effective conversation. It's not going to work for all subjects. You can't really use the Socratic method to deem whether your students know how to spell words correctly or not, because there is no leading questions, there's no probing, it's very black and white. The teacher must be comfortable in this type of setting because they will be asking probing questions. If the teacher is uncomfortable doing that, it's not going to work well. And it is better for a smaller class size, as it's sometimes hard to get large class sizes fully involved. So those are your negatives. But overall, I think we see definite more goods than bads. And interestingly enough, studies show that student scores are higher with the Socratic method than with the lecture method. So I think it's really important that we all see this for what it is, which could be a phenomenal teaching tool, another tool to hang in your belt, especially one-on-one with your patient. Give it a try. I think we'll all have a chance to at some point.